And we are back to the podcast. Once again, here I am Rob, here with Dave. We are here to talk about a well-loved movie from the past in a much deeper way than most people look at these movies, and also bring back an older movie into the consciousness of all these young folks who might not have seen this classic from the 80s, Police Academy. But first, we're going to entertain you in the audience with a little icebreaker. Since you may not know Dave and I as well as Dave and I know each other, we're going to give you a little insight into our character by playing a little movie-related game called Hollywood Shuffle. We are just going to do a quick run-through. And Dave, why don't you tell us how it works?
The game works with having a 3 set of cards. You have your lead, the action, and then the twist. It's a movie plot game. Now, what you do with these is you read your 3 cards and you either cast it, title it, or end it. Since this isn't the game where we have one or the other, I think what we're going to do is we're going to actually do all 3 actions with this game here. So I'm going to flip over our 3 cards. I'm going to start with the lead. This is a movie plot game. This is the concept. It can be quite fun to play. So our lead for this particular movie is a buxom stripper. The action is competes in a gritty playground basketball tournaments. Okay.
Playground basketball, okay.
So our buxom stripper is competing in some gritty playground basketball tournaments. And the twist to this amazing sounding movie is, despite being admonished by a crusty old dean.
Okay, so the full plot description of our movie is a buxom stripper competes in gritty playground basketball tournament despite being admonished by a crusty old dean. So what do we have to make out of that?
Well, ironically, this actually could be a plot of a movie from 1984.
Oh my gosh!
This is what's funny about this. Let's say for casting it, I'm pretty good at casting.
Let's go topical. Stormy Daniels.
Yeah. I was thinking Tom Cruise, but he's my go-to for all these oddball casting jobs.
No, I don't think you could, in any reality, describe Tom Cruise as a buxom stripper. I mean, you could go to the cast of Magic Mike, maybe.
Melissa McCarthy. She seems to be the go-to in these kind of things.
I don't know. Where's Pamela Anderson when you need her? She would have been the go-to for this back a couple years ago.
Let's pretend this is 1994 when Pamela Anderson was at the top of her thing.
Which was not Tommy Lee. But anyhow, continuing on. We need a crusty old dean, though.
How about that dude from Animal House? Why not? His name is John Vernon. He was in Animal House as the dean, and he was in Killer Clowns from Outer Space as that cop who was basically the character of the dean just as a cop.
I'm going to go with range of talent. If I could have anybody playing that role, and I could get anybody, I'm going Christopher Lee.
Ooh.
Yeah. I don't know about Krusty. Scary. Definitely. But Christopher Lee playing opposite and yelling at 1994 Pamela Anderson appeals to me on several levels, I think.
How would you end this marvelous masterpiece of a film?
Oh, I think there's really only one way you can do it. Of course, she's already been admonished by the dean. So at the very end, despite the fact that she introduces scandalously skimpy attire for her team as a distraction against the much more skilled opponents, which, as she flaunts her way across the playground, seems to work at distracting them with all the jiggling that's going on and basketball playing. And she goes for a layup. That sounds terrible in the context, too. Which she misses because she's a buxom stripper, not a basketball ace. But, I dare say, hilarity. Something absolutely wacky happens. For example, the ball comes down, it strikes one of the opponents in a tender location, which, due to his enjoyment of the lead's assets, causes the ball to ricochet at an awkward angle and goes back up and into the hoop for the winning score. The orphans that she is playing for end up winning, and everyone is happy. What do you think? Can you do better than that, Dangerous Dave?
I do not think so. I am quite satisfied with the plot of this movie, and I think the title of it should be Triple D Playground.
Yeah. Actually, we'll go with that. I'm trying to think of anything that can stay family friendly, and everything is failing me at this point. So
we are still in the PG rating right now, so
we're in the PG rating.
Pretty satisfied about
Despite how badly this game tried to make us go across that, but we're there yet. But we're going back to 1984 to Police Academy, and if you've seen this movie right now, you can hear the march that opened it. Where should we start, Dave?
We'll start with a description of the back from the DVD.
All right.
The case. The call went out. The recruits came in. No longer would police cadets have to meet standards of weight, height, and other requirements. Brains were optional too. Can't spell IQ, don't know the number 911, no matter. Police Academy grads are ready to uphold the law and disorder. It's not the first one I saw as a kid. Part 3 is the one that sticks in my mind, but Part 1 was the one that my stepdad had on VHS, taped off of HBO or something, but that's the one that I would always go back to because it's the only one I had to watch.
My experience with Police Academy was my dad also recorded off of public television, which means my experience changed considerably when I watched the unrated version. Made a lot of the jokes make a lot more sense, actually, but all in all, yeah, I'd seen it when I was younger, and thought it was pretty funny, too.
This first movie, there are actually, in my opinion, so many good things to go with it.
So, first of all, we have what in comedy, you have your establishing shots, and this time it was a brief little glimpse into the lives of the main characters as they all eventually would intersect at the police academy. As many comedies do, many of these characters were a bit extreme, but they had more personality than a lot of other characters in comedies. So the very first character we're introduced to is Eugene Tackleberry, who at the time he's a security guard.
Yep, he looks like he was Army reject. In fact, probably before the police academy was allowing just anybody join, it looks like he was probably a police reject too, probably even a prison guard. You just go down the line of where level of importance is somebody who wants to uphold the law, or protect and serve.
Because the next character we're introduced to is Carrie Mahoney. And charm is the word I would use to depict his character. Boy next door kind of charm.
Charisma.
Yeah, but it's not perfect. Sometimes he comes off as a little too smarmy, which doesn't always get him where he wants to be. But he also is a bit of a slacker, and he's not afraid of breaking the rules. And he very quickly becomes the central character of the story, too. Yeah, everyone else either works with him or as a foil to him.
The story revolves around Mahoney. He is our main character. Anybody who is introduced after that, they all interact with Mahoney one way or another.
Right. And also, one of the major things with Mahoney is he gets the lion's share of development, too. You definitely see some big character changes. Mahoney definitely changes his heart throughout. We'll cover that as we go. We're then introduced to Leslie Barbara, kind of your prototypical, overweight, lovable schlub. Innocence. Very innocent, yes. But he means well. His heart's in the right place. He is not the kind of person who should be a police officer. Some local street toughs end up victimizing him. He's working in a photo booth, and they throw him off a bridge. Of course, 80s comedy, that's not attempted homicide.
Right.
He goes floating off in the photo booth. But yeah, that was his personal trial that he had to deal with. Douglas Fackler. Yes.
The bumbling klutz to other people.
He's kind of serves as... Well, first of all, he's not very well developed in the movie. But they give him a nice scene where his wife, whose life must be hell, is screaming at him not to go off to be a police officer. We get full opportunity to see what his bad luck aura is like. Because his wife just gets kind of brutalized and ends up riding on the wrong side of his car. On the hood.
Probably a reason why he couldn't be an officer before. Just couldn't sign those papers. He probably stabbed a couple people with the pens.
Dude.
Unintentionally, of course.
Yes, be afraid.
I can't do it. I don't know if anybody can do it. Can you do that? No, you can't. No,
that
no,
sounds
no.
horrible.
Yeah,
I'm not going to try and embarrass
that's why
myself.
he could make a living off it.
It was Dr. Monsignor Larvell Jones, who, of course, was the human beatboxer, special effects sound guy. Not a great deal of character development. He was a big source of the comedy because he was a resource that you could tap again and again, and he just makes some wacky sound, and it either gets the story through a situation or makes something funny. You don't need to be too deep at this. This is a comedy at heart. But he ends up becoming fast friends with Mahoney, and they both go off to police academy together. You also, there at the police academy, you get to meet Kyle Blanks and Chad Copeland, who serve as our foils for most of the cast. These are two motivated young men, cadets, probably the kind of people who would get into the academy before the change in policy.
Yes, yeah. They fit the bill exactly in terms of what was expected to be a police officer back in those days, or what the film was implying to be. And they're your typical butt-kissing jerks.
And they make great foils because everything in an 80s comedy that you expect, the bad guys always have what they deserve handed to them. And
they get what's coming to them.
That definitely happens, which we will get into as we go through the plot of the story. We also are introduced to George Martin. George Martin is a kind of your playboy, over-the-top Hispanic heartthrob who comes in a convertible with several attractive women and gets out, and he signs up to be a police officer as well. Where was Hightower introduced?
Hightower was introduced. I mean, right now, what's going on in the movie, all our main characters are starting to come together. They're at the police academy. They're all meeting. Hightower is met when Copeland says something, and Hightower puts his hand right on his shoulder.
Yeah, I remember.
Towering.
I remember the situation. He mentions to Blanks, boy, there sure are a lot of something racially inappropriate here. And then, yes, the big paw of Hightower goes onto his shoulder because they're getting sized up physically. But then we get introduced to Lieutenant Harris and Sergeant Callahan. If you like comedy villains, he is probably one of the people that you would think is the prototype.
He plays it so well, very well, to the point where I think we've seen Harris in other movies playing Harris.
Yeah.
He has a lot of presence in that role. His voice carries appropriately, and he's got the authority.
Not just the authority, but also he relishes using his power over those he's in charge of. You can tell he enjoys every bit of it, and that's an important thing that he carries over into that role. Many of us have had authority figures who were just jerks and lorded it over us.
Oh, yes. You and I both know that.
Oh, we do, my friend. Callahan is the strong, silent female counterpart who doesn't say a lot.
Drill Sergeant Light.
But she also, when she gets her moments, very clear that she is the boss, but she is kind of an interesting take off of Harris, who is almost ridiculously lampooning the role of the drill instructor.
Again, this movie's got so many characters, which every single one of them we're talking about. We got a few more to mention yet, even.
We do.
What about Hooks?
Yes. All you have to do is mention Hooks, and if you've ever seen a Police Academy movie, you know exactly who this character is. But again, she seems the exact kind of person who should not be a police officer because she has no physical presence, and
she's not intimidating.
She's the opposite of intimidating. Thompson. Well, romantic interest in Mahoney. Yeah. She's a rich girl who wants to try hard.
To be a police officer. And,
yes.
And one thing, she might be Mahoney's love interest, but they portray her as being very competent on her own.
She would have been a good cadet.
Or she's is a good cadet.
Yeah, she's outside of the zoo that this whole police academy thing turns into. She doesn't have to be there. She wants to be a police officer. She wants to do the right thing. On screen, she's doing well.
Right. They don't show her bumbling or anything.
Which is, again, a great deal of restraint that this movie shows. Three-dimensional, engaging characters who are fun to watch the interplay.
And that's what struck me watching this movie recently was I forgot how serious this first one is. It's got serious beats to it.
And a lot of other movies just go with sight gags, not setting it up, not letting things build. We then...
So many,
yes,
many characters.
Anybody who's seen the movie probably has to love Commandant Lassard a little bit. He's like the bumbling grandpa everybody wishes they had. He means well, and in his prime he was probably very effective as a police officer and a teacher, eventually going to the commandant position. But his mind isn't there, which is played off for comic effect, and it's led to this wonderful character. He is set up for possibly one of the greatest comedy moments in 80s comedy. But we're
the TV version?
Not the TV version. Not the TV version. We find out Mahoney and Tackleberry end up being roommates.
That's
interesting.
Right. That is great.
So you have the guy who least wants to be there in the same room as the guy who most wants to be there, specifically shooting things and carrying a gun.
He put the playboy George Martin with the married guy Fackler.
Yes. It's basically serving to highlight the characters by shining them against their polar opposites, which was quite effective.
Who was Jones with again?
That was Barbara. If you remember the scene, Barbara is on the bed, zoned out, and Jones is playing a video game without the video game.
Oh, yeah.
Love that scene. Harris shows restraint because, as we find out, Harris can't just boot Mahoney as like Mahoney wants to be booted.
Right, so he's stuck in this limbo that he can't quit, he can't be thrown out. You know, that's the worst thing for Mahoney.
So then we can go over some of the different jokes and pratfalls that were used. You have a couple of favorites?
There's only 3 that I list that I really enjoy, but this is the funniest scene in the movie.
Oh, yes.
The podium scene.
The podium scene, which admittedly, like I said, my first experience with this movie was watching the TV edit, which really butchers the meaning of the scene. And what I remember it, of course, they hide in the podium in front of where Lassard is going to stand.
Right in front of a podium where a prostitute is hiding.
And the prostitute is under the impression that, Mahoney says, he's not the client, but once they're under the podium, well, Lassard is standing there, and the magic happened.
I wish I could find this TV version he speaks of. I vaguely remember it from back in the day. I think today you could probably show the scene as is, but when I watch the scene now, I'm like, oh, I get it. Because remember, I watched this as a kid. It was like a, 10-year-old kid? I didn't understand what was going on.
Sure. And you see her poke her head out of the cloth divider in front of the podium, and there's Lassard standing there. She reaches out and I believe zip, and you kind of can infer from that what happens after that. And they don't show it, of course. The performance that is delivered, Lassard having the anguished expressions as he is giving his performance, which drifts off tremendously. And then Mahoney pops his head out at first again, which leads Lassard to think that Mahoney provided the service, but doesn't make any sense if you saw an edit that chopped that up.
Yeah.
So
the other joke, which actually was what leads into this one, was our cadets, Blanks and Copeland. They want to go to the party. Where's the party at? These are 2 butt-kissing jerks.
Stooges.
Nobody wants them at their parties.
They demand that Barbara find out.
So he asks Mahoney, and Mahoney gives him the address, and it cuts to our 2 guys, our 2 bigot characters.
That's fair.
They're walking with their polo shirts, and they're walking
pastel polo shirts,
walking all macho. They go to the bar door,
and their heads are shaved because of a previous joke. So they've got extremely short hair. They're fairly muscular men walking into the Blue Oyster Bar, a macho gay bar. Your leather-bound motor bicyclists.
They're wearing your Mad Max bad guy uniforms. So they go there, and thus begins their dancing scene.
Which is quite good ballroom dancing, I must say. The implications, of course, are that Copeland and Blanks do not enjoy themselves throughout the night. But they're there all night long while the party is going on. All right, so that's 2. What's your other favorite scene.
Oh my gosh,
is
the
fun.
horse scene with Harris.
Okay. This one doesn't have a great deal of setup other than the animosity
this,
that Harris is a jerk who deserves this.
for whatever reason, Harris, and Mahoney are in a traffic jam. Harris gets impatient. What is going on up there? And then he gets onto a motorcycle to commandeer and can't really handle it. So here he's riding it and it's going up on him. And
he looked impressive doing the wheelie for a while.
And a car pulls out in front of him and then boom, he goes flying.
Over the hood, straight at the back end of a horse trailer.
See the horse looks at it, cuts away, and you hear the
poor horse.
Oh, a little quick gag. I mean, it's funny.
And you see Mahoney with a shocked and somewhat horrified look at his face, not laughing. Again, Mahoney is capable of showing empathy towards Harris, but he calls out, "Someone call a veterinarian!"
Cut to Harris getting his new hat, and of course,
his hair is very slicked back too.
You told no one,
not a soul.
And then as he walks by everybody, they're all just like ready to burst out laughing.
Yep.
And I think the best part of this whole scene is when he turns to Callahan and she's holding back a laugh just as much as the other cadets are.
By this point, Callahan has gone through her character twist too, which is what I'd like to bring up. Again, we're talking about how these characters do get some development. It's delivered through the comedy. George Martin's hedonistic womanizer throughout, and he keeps slipping into the women's side of the cadets' dormitory dressed as a woman in a robe and goes in and giggling ensues. One time he tries this and he opens the door and instead it's Sergeant Callahan. Sergeant Callahan demands to know what he's doing, doesn't let him finish, rips off his robe and jumps him. Callahan is aggressive and takes charge of the situation, and then you see Martine staggering back to the other dormitory and confesses to Mahoney that he's in love and probably not used to a woman doing to him the kind of things that Callahan probably just did to him. And so we know that Callahan is not the cold, heartless drill instructor all the time. And you also see Martine, who actually in his confession, he drops his accent and confesses that he's not really George Martin. He's George Martin. He's just a guy who found out that a Spanish accent and a tan works for the ladies, which is actually a little bit of character development. And it helps Callahan become more sympathetic as she shares in a joke with the others, which is interesting how these different punchlines all blend and add to the story. This is great comedy crafting that you don't see so often anymore. I like montage scenes. I like how they can tell a story and they can show a sense of progression. And there's a couple of montage scenes through their training. But some of the things that you see with the characters that serve just to keep amplifying the characters are when Copeland and Blanks are kind of brutalizing Mahoney after Harris has just had enough of him. Make him run till he throws up and makes him do push-ups in the rain and different things like that. I thought was really good use of driving home that Mahoney is suffering for all this stuff. A lot of comedies don't actually make the comic lead ever really suffer for what he does. But in this, he fully does. He does go through quite a bit for his antics. The shoe polish on the megaphone scene was a nice little quick hit comedy. Mahoney finds a way to get a dig in, which was kind of fun.
If we're talking montage scenes here, especially some of the comedy, any of the Tackleberry stuff,
sure,
is pretty good.
I always found the obstacle course, the shooting range was a particularly fun one. Anything with guns and watching Tackleberry go wild is going to serve him. Those are his shining moments.
Could you please enlighten us with the TV version of Drop the Stereo scene?
Okay, well, one of the training scenes, they're in the gymnasium practicing having a physical presence. At one point, Harris is pantomiming being a burglar. First, he picks on hooks, and her delivery is, "Don't move, this is a stick-up." That's pretty good, Dave. Yeah. So she completely loses it. And then he has Tackleberry move in, and Tackleberry's delivery for the TV edit was something like, "Don't move or I'll blow your gosh darn knees off, egg roll." That's not what he actually says. but it's probably the closest they could match up with his lip.
We got to talk about the Oscar moment. And I realized this after watching it a couple of weeks ago. Believe it or not, you removed this comedy from Police Academy and you focused right in this scene, played seriously with heart and conviction. Hightower going to Mahoney and waking Mahoney up. Oh, Hightower, what do you need? You know, and he's all like, I don't know how to drive, and I'm afraid if I don't pass this test tomorrow, Harris will kick me out. Will you help me, Mahoney? But this is a beautiful scene in this, you know, what is labeled as a comedy. It's silly as it sounds, but I'm like, wow, this would be an Oscar moment.
And another reason, too, why this works, and a lot of comedies cannot pull off a moment like this and make it feel legitimate, is because from the very beginning, these characters were created as real people. Yes, they have their quirks that make them comedy characters, but at the same time, Mahoney, he is a nice guy at heart. He doesn't want to hurt people. He does value his friends. Hightower, who could easily have been a punchline of just being this tall and unstoppable black guy who, you know, stands out in kind of his own awesome force, because Bubba Smith was an awesome character himself. But they didn't do that. They made them real people, and the interaction between them was genuine and sincere and sweet. And yeah, it was a very nice moment. Another thing that this was nice about too is it gave Hightower some vulnerability, because up to that point he was, you know, what do you see him challenged by? The obstacle course, he pushes the obstacle over. Climbing the rope, he just yanks the rope out of the ceiling. This actually gives him something that he can't just get through because he's huge and strong.
The scene plays itself out. He passes the driving test, get Hooks in there, and Hooks does her little slow stroller Sunday drive, the kind of drive you're behind somebody, you're in a hurry, you're like, what, are you going like under the speed limit here, let's go.
Oh, don't get me started on that one.
It's always when you're running just a little bit behind for work.
Always.
So you get that, and poor Hooks accidentally runs over Copeland's feet. And the second time I was watching this with you, I was watching where Copeland was standing. His feet was over the yellow line, so it's his fault it got ran over.
I don't recognize the racial slur that's used, but it apparently is enough to get a reaction from everybody, especially Hightower.
It made him mad, and he was going to show Copeland exactly how mad he was. And
Copeland ducks into the car to get away from Hightower.
And Harris knew what was coming, and then Hightower flips the car over. In the process of the car being flipped over, he gets kicked out of the academy. He is out. He is done.
Which is another rather dramatic moment in a comedy. Something that a lot of comedies cannot be self-aware of enough to have. A significant point in the movie. First of all, it takes Hightower away from the story, and you really don't like Copeland by the end of that. Dan Harris, to a lesser extent too, comes off as even more villainy by getting rid of him.
Yeah, from beginning to end, that whole scene could be your Oscar moment stuff there too.
The finale. You can sum it up by just saying it's a riot, a very small riot. Yeah. They didn't have a lot of extras.
I think I described it as a serious riot action sequence that could be pulled right from an 80s cop show from television.
Yeah, I think the most rioters you ever see on the screen is like 30 people.
They do those cuts. You see the same people running out of the corner to make it look like there's more.
Sure. And of course, you know, it's being a comedy. The whole thing starts ridiculously and is the entire payoff pretty much of having the Fackler character in the story. Because
he chucks an apple. Here's an apple. Whatever, I don't want it. Throws it, hits one of the guys in the head that's like walking, and he thinks that these other guys hit him, so he hits him, and then all these people start hitting each other, and then our mini riot happens.
Yeah, mini riot. The cadets find out that we're going into action. Interestingly enough, just before this, Mahoney has been kicked out. He has been told he is done. He goes into his bedroom where Tackleberry is already getting all of his gear on. Tackleberry puts on the riot helmet and puts down the visor, and Mahoney is having his change of heart, and his moment he looks up, and all of a sudden, then you see the bus that's going to be taking all the cadets, and you see Mahoney get on, and he's got his visor on. Then, this riot scene pretty much single-handedly takes all of the different character arcs that we've been going over and draws them up neatly together through to a screw up in the system. The cadets are brought into the riot area instead of in a safe place, turning away cars and stuff and keep cordon off the side. Nope, they're dropped right
in the middle,
in the heart of the
mini riot.
Resolutions. Copeland and Blanks.
They end up at the Blue Oyster Bar again.
Well, Copeland and Blanks, first of all, are enjoying bullying the local populace behind a cyclone fence before the cyclone fence ends and they end up in front of one of the biggest locals who relieves them of their guns, which is pretty shameful because they give them up without a fight. And then they go running off and end up in the Blue Oyster Bar again. So that's a callback to that joke. And all you hear is them screaming as they run in. So awesome. Yeah. So they get theirs in the end and they serve to give this guy guns, which becomes important. Barbara meet some old friends.
Yep, they are moving a television out. Appears that they are stealing it, and for whatever reason, even though Barbara's dressed up as a cop, they still walk up to him and they're all like, "What are you gonna do about it, Barbara?" And then he's like,
"Remember, we know that they're familiar with him, and we know they've bullied him in the past."
And then he gets to take him out, essentially.
Pulls out a nightstick and delivers a little justice, and effectively, it wasn't really necessary, but they got what was coming to them. We see Jones and Mahoney, who end up running off and end up meeting up with Lassard in the car. And the mob comes and crashes in on the car.
Which is probably the whole riot right
which
there.
Is all 30 people were just
shaking that car.
Yeah, which is resolved by Deus Ex Jones.
Should I even try it? I can't do that.
That's not terrible for blowing into your hands like that. But yes, he pulls out the microphone for the PA system on the car, simulates gunfire, drives them all off, hilariously so, which fits this kind of comedy well. Also, then that frees up Lassard, Mahoney, and Jones to drive to the next scene, which is where Thompson is being shot at by the same thug who originally
listed as the main bad guy, so we shall call him the main
bad guy. He doesn't have a name, but he took the guns from Copeland and Blanks, and turns out he is holding Harris hostage for all that fun stuff. Mahoney has to try to dispel this situation, and because Mahoney is not a physical fighting type character, fails. And he ends up also becoming a hostage of the main bad guy. So then out of nowhere comes Hightower. And of course, we're not sure where Hightower fits into this because he was kicked out of the academy and he doesn't like Harris. We think he likes Mahoney, but he sizes up the situation and tells the guy he should shoot Harris first. And as he gets ready to, bam! Right in the face. Hightower punches him, knocks him down a flight of stairs. So we get that resolution. Hightower is back, hands the guns to Harris and Mahoney. And of course, then we have the other resolution as the criminal is at the bottom of the stairs, which is a good stunt work job. Down the ground, about to get up, there's Hooks with her famous, "Don't move, dirtbag!" And she was mad. She had the gun in his face convincingly. Boom. So she pulled that off. Again, her character evolved. Fackler just ended up getting some clothes that he lifted from
disappeared.
A shop. So that was a little weird. Not a lot of resolution going on there. Tackleberry missed the gunfighting.
He missed the gunfighting.
He was so sad, so angry at the end. He was beating his head on the car because there was gunplay and he missed it. So that's kind of a resolution in that he wasn't there in the point where him being there probably would have made things worse because he almost certainly would have returned fire and possibly could have killed Harris. So it was good for comedy that he wasn't, and it made sense. So Hightower and Mahoney get medals, and everybody graduates.
Even Blanks and Copeland.
Yep, Blanks and Copeland graduate too. I don't know how you prefer to do reviews.
Oh, like when we rank them? Like,
sure.
I'm a 4-star person. Break it down is like 4 stars is best, 3 stars is good, 2 stars okay, 1 star weak, but does have a little bit of something there, and then no stars is whatever. go away.
Okay, and just to shake things up, I use the 10-point rating system.
Oh boy.
So while he's using stars, I go up to 10. 10 being the absolute perfect pinnacle of cinematography. 8 being good, absolutely worth your time. 6 being it's serviceable. 4 and below at various stages of this is broken or it didn't work. All right, that being said, Dave, how would you rate this movie in total?
3 stars.
3 stars. I would rate it, well, first of all, IMDb, which also rates movies by a 10-point system, rates it 6.7. I would give it a 7 myself. It wasn't the perfect comedy,
right,
but it was extremely serviceable. You weren't lost through any of the punchlines. None of them didn't make sense. Even today, the humor still holds true. You know who the good guys are. You know who the bad guys are. The bad guys get it in the end. The good guys do well, but there are some hiccups along the way. The characters all have character development. The dialogue is solid. The action moves well. It doesn't get stuck and hung up in a lot of places. It's just the right length. What's the total running time on this movie?
Oh, 96 minutes.
In my mind, an hour and a half is perfect for a comedy. You have enough time to get introduced to all the characters, you can set up the conflict, you can have multiple crises, resolutions, and you have enough time for the finale. Longer than that, it's going to drag. It's going to drag. The characters were believable. The actors who were in those roles made them live and breathe. They did a good job. Some were better than others.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the scripting had a little bit of weakness on a couple of the characters. There wasn't a lot to work with some of them. There's relatively little swearing. So, for the most part,
I think they even said the F-bomb, did they?
I don't believe so. So, yeah, all in all, perfectly worth your time. If you're not into 80s comedy, you could pass this by and your life would not be drastically diminished, but it's definitely worth an hour and a half of your time to watch a good comedy with good actors who all get along well together and good direction, decent screenplay, very good soundtrack. I thought the soundtrack really captured the essence of the movie. Dave?
The music is way above and beyond what a comedy of this nature should even have. Usually in this time period too, they didn't spend, I don't know how much money they spent on the score, probably not that much, but the point is, a movie like this would typically get the guy who's doing the whole synthetic thing in the 80s. Oh, I could do your whole score all synthetic. This guy used an actual orchestra. Like, this movie's got music that shouldn't be in a comedy like this.
Yeah, you had nice fanfares that fit into the institutional theme of the Academy. You had nice flute trills going through. You had dramatically appropriate music. It didn't waste any time on soundtrack bites and clips throughout. It was all orchestral music in the background, which I thought worked very effectively.
Yeah, and I think, in my opinion, that's what also helped some of the sequels maintain as long as they did, because the musical style carried throughout. I think we could mention the director, Hugh Wilson. He directed Police Academy and co-wrote the screenplay. I've never looked at his filmography before until today, and quite frankly, not a whole lot to his name, especially before this. Before this, it was mainly television, which he directed a few episodes of the Bob Newhart Show, wrote a few episodes, was the creator of a TV show called WKRP in Cincinnati. I only vaguely remember that because my stepdad would watch that when it was on reruns. Well, obviously reruns because it's from 1978. And the stuff that he did after, he did a movie with Whoopi Goldberg in 87 called Burglar. Vaguely remember that film with Whoopi Goldberg. Guarding Tess with Nicolas Cage. And then his last couple films, he must have had a thing with Brendan Fraser here. The last couple movies he did, Dudley Do-Right and Blast from the Past. I mean, that's basically what his filmography was. There's not a whole lot to it. We should mention what came out in 1984. I mean, this was a huge movie for 1984. And we can look at the top 5 movies of 1984. Beverly Hills Cop.
That's a monster, of course.
Ghostbusters.
Well, yes, one of my favorite movies of all time.
Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Not the strongest one in the series, but yeah, it's obviously a box office draw.
I love that one. Gremlins.
Gotcha.
The fifth movie of that year would have been The Karate Kid, and the sixth biggest money-making film of 1984, Police Academy. Other notable movies from 1984, they're not even in the top 10, and they might stretch further down the list.
Sure.
But I think I picked them in order. Like Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock came out that year, and I think that was maybe like the ninth movie. Don't quote me on that.
Police Academy beat Star Trek in the box office.
Yes.
Well, number one, that might show how the shine had come off of the
Star Trek films.
The Star Trek films a bit by that point.
Revenge of the Nerds came out, and
Yeah.
Police Academy triumphant over that. Terminator, which started James Cameron's career of maybe filming a movie someday. I don't know what's going on. And then another one from 84, A Nightmare on Elm Street. So all those big movies that had franchises afterwards. And also that same year was Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. And that was the movie that knocked Police Academy out of its number one slot, because it was number one for 3 weeks in a row. 3 weekends in a row it was number one. And then Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter came out, which also featured Bruce Marr, the actor that played Fackler. He went from being a bumbling idiot in the police academy to I would assume, a male nurse getting stabbed by Jason.
What I like about it is that this is just comedy done right. It seems like today, in our age of spoofs and a lack of originality.
Can we even call them that today?
No, not really. But a lot of movies lack the ability to develop a good joke and deliver it at a dramatically appropriate moment.
The humor in Police Academy is not mean-spirited or over-the-top vulgar.
Well, it playfully flirts with that edge.
It does.
Sending Copeland and Blanks to a bar where they're...
But it's not... I think if they were to do that scene today, which they still could pull that scene off today, but they would go over the top for the sake of being over the top and offensive.
Who was your favorite character through this movie?
Oh my gosh.
If you had to pick one MVP, not irregardless of how much screen time they had, who would you say out of it was the person that every time they were on the screen, they stole your attention?
Harris.
Yeah.
It's just because of the way he plays it. And plus, yeah, he might be our story's bad guy, but he's not a bad guy. One of those situations where you make a movie where you got nothing but good guys in it, essentially, and then he's not really...
See, I find him to be the opposite, but he's a compelling villain. He is sneaky. He is somewhat dishonest. I mean, he is not looking out for the best interests of the people around him. At the same time, he doesn't have a lot of the lazy villain traits, where he doesn't appear to be sadistic, except when it comes down to tormenting the people who don't meet up to his standards. Or he does have moments where he seems like he genuinely does care to do his job well. That just unfortunately goes awry when he has to go to underhand tactics to move forward. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that Harris, every time he's on the screen, you have to watch him because he's going to drive the action. His characterization is fantastic throughout, very consistent. Even when bad things are happening to him, good things are going his way, he still sticks to character, and he's always dynamic and interesting. And the actor does that with other roles that he's in too. I mean, he's just really good, and he's kind of become an archetype, like we've said before. A lot of other people have channeled Harris or tried to. So who's your least favorite character through the whole thing?
I don't know why, but I've never liked George Martin.
Okay, fair enough.
And it's
just because his character is so different from yourself, or you don't see yourself in that.
It could be the bias of me watching all the other movies and seeing him in this movie. But at the same time, though, I also like Barbara, who never showed up in any other films either. But I could relate to him more as a character. Barbara, George Martin, I don't know. He didn't really strike much to me. I mean, they had the joke, and that was it. And maybe that's all he was good for, was that joke and that payoff, and they figured maybe they don't need him in the sequels because there was really nothing else to do with him. But he just was there. Anything that he did for laughs in that was not really that funny, I thought, with the exception of of the scene where they're getting their haircuts, our two guys, Doplin and Blanks, they're like, take it all off. Okay, fine, sure, take it all off. You know, they get the military crew cut, and George Martin just is like, oh, just take a little bit off the sides. Okay. And then the two guys are like, you can do that? It's like, sure, we're not the army, you know? I mean, that was the only thing that I thought was remotely funny, but that could have even been done with just a random character in the barber shop at the same time when Copeland and Blanks were getting their hair buzzed.
Yeah. Barber could have done that easily enough, too.
Sure, he could have got a haircut. Why didn't he get a haircut?
I don't think he had long hair.
It was a little longish.
Yeah. My least favorite character is Hooks. She's one-dimensional. She does serve to kind of amplify how Harris is kind of unlikable and serves as a target for Copeland's bigotry, which sets him up again as a villain. And they do the same thing with her for the next movies too. It's the same squeaky voice. And then all of a sudden she has her big reveal. Don't move, dirtbag!
But that's all she is, you know. And to be honest, that's not a character you really want to have a lot of lines, because I just watched part 5 and she spoke a lot, and it reminded me for the reason why you don't have Batman talk a lot like he did in The Dark Knight. He was talking quite a bit, and you get tired of hearing this. And that was like with Hooks. She was delivering a lot of lines, and you're just like watching this movie, and she's just sitting there talking, and you're like, she's speaking too much. It's hurting my ears.
Well, that's fair. I just don't like one-dimensionality of the payoff. That's just my thing. And there's not enough of Fackler in there for me to really not care about him. I'm not much for the over-the-top nerd character, but I for some reason, he didn't grate on me as much as Hooks did. And actually, we might not plow through all 7 movies in a row to start us off. We might jump around a little bit. We'll definitely be coming back to the Police Academy movies, though.
That's all I got for this movie.
Yep, it was a fun movie. We both enjoyed it, both endorse it, and we will pretty safe in saying this was probably going to be the best one out of the whole series.
Yes.
But to put it into proper context, we should see what it has spawned. So coming up in the very near future, Police Academy 2 will be the subject of us going back to the podcast. And this has been Rob and Dave. If you have not yet subscribed to our channel, please do so. Then you'll be notified for next releases that we make. We're going to try to put these out every week, and we are going to be scratching that itch you feel way back, where only you have any business going, that craves your 80s movies and other geek topics that we will soon uncover for your pleasure. Thank you for listening, and may you have many wonderful moments of your own. Farewell.